Chapter 45, the affidavit. So far as what there may be of a narrative in this book, and indeed as indirectly touching one or two very interesting and curious particulars in the habits of sperm whales, the foregoing chapter in its earlier part is as important a one as will be found in this volume. But the leading matter of it requires to be still further and more familiarly enlarged upon in order to be adequately understood, and moreover to take away any incredulity which a profound ignorance of the entire subject may induce in some minds as to the natural verity of the main points of this affair. I care not to perform this part of my task methodically, but shall be content to produce the desired impression by separate citations of items, practically or reliably known to me as a whaleman. And from these citations, I take it, the conclusion aimed at will naturally follow of itself. First, I have personally known 3 instances where a whale, after receiving a harpoon, has effected a complete escape, and after an interval, in one instance of 3 years, has been again struck by the same hand and slain, where the 2 irons, both marked by the same private cipher, have been taken from the body. In the instance where 3 years intervened between the flinging of the 2 harpoons, and I think it may have been something more than that, the man who darted them happening in the interval to go in a trading ship on a voyage to Africa, went ashore there, joined a discovery party, and penetrated far into the interior, where he traveled for a period of nearly 2 years, often endangered by serpents, savages, tigers, poisonous miasmas, with all the other common perils incident to wandering in the heart of unknown regions. Meanwhile, the whale he had struck must also have been on its travels. No doubt it had thrice circumnavigated the globe, brushing with its flanks all the coasts of Africa, but to no purpose. This man and this whale again came together, and the one vanquished the other. I say I myself have known 3 instances similar to this. That is, in 2 of them I saw the whale struck, and upon the second attack saw the 2 irons with the respective marks cut in them, afterwards taken from the dead fish. In the 3-year instance, it so fell out that I was in the boat both times, first and last, and the last time distinctly recognized a peculiar sort of huge mole under the whale's eye, which I had observed there 3 years previous. I say 3 years, but I am pretty sure it was more than that. Here are 3 instances, then, which I personally know the truth of, but I have heard of many other instances from persons whose veracity in the matter there is no good ground to impeach. Secondly, it is well known in the sperm whale fishery, however ignorant the world ashore may be of it, that there have been several memorable historical instances where a particular whale in the ocean has been at distant times and places popularly cognizable. Why such a whale became thus marked was not altogether, and originally owing to his bodily peculiarities as distinguished from other whales, for however peculiar in that respect any chance whale may be, they soon put an end to his peculiarities by killing him and boiling him down into a peculiarly valuable oil. No, the reason was this, that from the fatal experiences of the fishery there hung a terrible prestige of perilousness about such a whale as there did about Rinaldo Rinaldini, insomuch that most fishermen were content to recognize him by merely touching their tarpaulins when he would be discovered lounging by them on the sea, without seeking to cultivate a more intimate acquaintance. Like some poor devils ashore that happen to know an irascible great man, they make distant, unobtrusive salutations to him in the street, lest if they pursued the acquaintance further, they might receive a summary thump for their presumption. But not only did each of these famous whales enjoy great individual celebrity, nay, you may call it an ocean-wide renown, Not only was he famous in life and now is immortal in forecastle stories after death, but he was admitted into all the rights, privileges, and distinctions of a name, had as much a name indeed as Cambyses or Caesar. Was it not so, or, O Timor Jack, thou famed Leviathan, scarred like an iceberg, who so long didst lurk in the oriental straits of that name, whose spout was oft seen from the palmy beach of Bay? Was it not so, O New Zealand Tom, thou terror of all cruisers that crossed their wakes in the vicinity of the Tattoo Land? Was it not so, O Morquan, King of Japan, whose lofty jet, they say at times, assumed the semblance of a snow-white cross against the sky? Was it not so, O Don Miguel, thou Chilean whale, marked like an old tortoise, with mystic hieroglyphics upon the back? In plain prose, here are 4 whales as well known to the students of cetacean history as Marius or Scylla to the classic scholar. But this is not all. New Zealand Tom and Don Miguel, after at various times creating great havoc among the boats of different vessels, were finally gone in quest of, systematically hunted out, chased, and killed by valiant whaling captains who heaved up their anchors with that express object as much in view as in setting out through the Narragansett woods, Captain Church of old had it in mind to capture that notorious murderous savage Anawan, the headmost warrior of the Indian King Philip.
I do not know where I can find a better place than just here to make mention of 1 or 2 other things, which to me seem important as in printed form establishing in all respects the reasonableness of the whole story of the white whale, more especially the catastrophe. For this is one of those disheartening instances where truth requires full as much bolstering as error. So ignorant are most landsmen of some of the plainest and most palpable wonders of the world, that without some hints touching the plain facts, historical and otherwise, of the fishery, they might scout at Moby-Dick as a monstrous fable, or still worse and more detestable, a hideous and intolerable allegory. First, though most men have some vague, flitting ideas of the general perils of the grand fishery, yet they have nothing like a fixed, vivid conception of those perils and the frequency with which they occur. One reason, perhaps, is that not 1 in 50 of the actual disasters and deaths by casualties in the fishery ever finds a public record at home, however transient and immediately forgotten that record. Do you suppose that that poor fellow there, who this moment perhaps caught by the whale line off the coast of New Guinea, is being carried down to the bottom of the sea by the sounding Leviathan, do you suppose that poor fellow's name will appear in the newspaper obituary you will read tomorrow at your breakfast? No, because the mails are very irregular between here and New Guinea. In fact, did you ever hear what might be called regular news, direct or indirect, from New Guinea? Yet I tell you that upon one particular voyage which I made to the Pacific, among many others, we spoke 30 different ships, every one of which had a death by a whale, some of them more than one, and 3 that had each lost the boat's crew. For God's sake, be economical with your lamps and candles. Not a gallon you burn, but at least 1 drop of man's blood was spilled for it. Secondly, people ashore have indeed some indefinite idea that a whale is an enormous creature of enormous power. But I have ever found that when narrating to them some specific example of this twofold enormousness, they have significantly complimented me on my facetiousness. When I declare upon my soul, I had no more idea of being facetious than Moses when he wrote the history of the plagues of Egypt. But fortunately, the special point I here seek can be established upon testimony entirely independent of my own. That point is this: the sperm whale is in some cases sufficiently powerful, knowing, and judiciously malicious, as with direct forethought to stave in, utterly destroy, and sink a large ship, and what is more, the sperm whale has done it. First, in the year 1820, the ship Essex, Captain Pollard of Nantucket, was cruising in the Pacific. One day she saw spouts, lowered her boats, and gave chase to a shoal of sperm whales. Ere long, several of the whales were wounded, when suddenly a very large whale, escaping from the boats, issued from the shoal and bore directly down upon the ship. Dashing his forehead against her hull, he so stove her in that in less than 10 minutes she settled down and fell over. Not a surviving plank of her has been seen since. After the severest exposure, part of the crew reached the land in their boats. Being returned home at last, Captain Pollard once more sailed for the Pacific in command of another ship. But the gods shipwrecked him again upon unknown rocks and breakers. For the second time his ship was utterly lost, and forthwith, forswearing the sea, he was never tempted it since. At this day, Captain Pollard is a resident of Nantucket. I have seen Owen Chase, who was chief mate of the Essex at the time of the tragedy. I have read his plain and faithful narrative. I have conversed with his son, and all within a few miles of the scene of the catastrophe. Secondly, the ship Union, also of Nantucket, was in the year 1807 totally lost off the Azores by a similar onset. But the authentic particulars of this catastrophe I have never chanced to encounter, though from the whale hunters I have now and then heard casual allusions to it. Thirdly, some 18 or 20 years ago, Commodore J., then commanding an American sloop of war of the first class, happened to be dining with a party of whaling captains on board a Nantucket ship in the harbor of Oahu, Sandwich Islands. Conversation turning upon whales, the Commodore was pleased to be skeptical, touching the amazing strength ascribed to them by the professional gentlemen present. He peremptorily denied, for example, that any whale could so smite his stout sloop of war as to cause her to leak so much as a thimbleful. Very good, but there is more coming. Some weeks after, the Commodore set sail in this impregnable craft for Valparaiso, but he was stopped on the way by a portly sperm whale that begged a few moments' confidential business with him. That business consisted in fetching the Commodore's craft such a thwack that with all his pumps going, he made straight for the nearest port to heave down and repair. I am not superstitious, but I consider the Commodore's interview with that whale as providential. Was not Saul of Tarsus converted from unbelief by a similar fright? I tell you, the sperm whale will stand no nonsense. I will now refer you to Langdorf's Voyages for a little circumstance in point, peculiarly interesting to the writer hereof. Langsdorff, you must know by the way, was attached to the Russian Admiral Krusenstern's famous discovery expedition in the beginning of the present century. Captain Langsdorff thus begins his 17th chapter.
By the 13th of May, our ship was ready to sail, and the next day we were out in the open sea, on our way back to Ochtest. The weather was very clear and fine, but so intolerably cold that we were obliged to keep on our fur clothing. For some day we had very little wind. It was not till the 19th that a brisk gale from the northwest sprang up. An uncommon large whale, the body of which was larger than the ship itself, lay almost at the surface of the water, but was not perceived by anyone on board till the moment when the ship was in full sail was almost upon him, so that it was impossible to prevent it striking against him. We were thus placed in the most imminent danger, as this gigantic creature, setting up its back, raised the ship 3 feet at least out of the water. The masts railed and the sails fell all together, while we, who were below, all sprang instantly upon the deck, concluding that we had struck upon some rock. Instead of this, we saw the monster sailing off with the utmost gravity and solemnity. Captain de Wolf applied immediately to the pumps to examine whether or not the vessel had received any damage from the shock, but we found that very happily it had escaped entirely uninjured. Now that Captain de Wolfe here alluded to as commanding the ship in question, is a New Englander who, after a long life of unusual adventures as a sea captain, this day resides in the village of Dorchester, near Boston. I have the honor of being a nephew of his. I have particularly questioned him concerning this passage in Langsdorff. He substantiates every word. The ship, however, was by no means a large one, a Russian craft built on the Siberian coast and purchased by my uncle after bartering away the vessel in which he sailed from home. In that up and down manly book of old-fashioned adventure, so full too of honest wonders, The Voyage of Lionel Wafer, one of ancient Dampier's old chums, I found a little matter set down so like that just quoted from Langsdorff that I cannot forbear inserting it here for a corroborative example, if such be needed. Lionel, it seems, was on his way to John Ferdinando, as he calls the modern Juan Fernandez. In our way thither, he says, about 4 o'clock in the morning, when we were about 150 leagues from the main of America, our ship felt a terrible shock, which put our men in such consternation that they could hardly tell where they were or what to think. But everyone began to prepare for death. And indeed, the shock was so sudden and violent that we took it for granted that the ship had struck against a rock. But when the amazement was a little over, we cast the lead and sounded, but found no ground. The suddenness of the shock made the guns leap in their carriages, and several of the men were shaken out of their hammocks. Captain Davis, who lay his head over a gun, was thrown out of his cabin. Lionel then goes on to impute the shock to an earthquake and seems to substantiate the imputation by stating that a great earthquake, somewhere about that time, did actually do great mischief along the Spanish land. But I should not much wonder if, in the darkness of that early hour of the morning, the shock was, after all, caused by an unseen whale vertically bumping the hull from beneath. I might proceed with several more examples, one way or another known to me, of the great power and malice at times of the sperm whale. In more than one instance, he has been known not only to chase the assailing boats back to their ships, but to pursue the ship itself, and long withstand all the lances hurled at him from its decks. The English ship Pusey Hall can tell a story on that head. And as for his strength, let me say that there have been examples where the lines attached to a running sperm whale have, in a calm, been transferred to the ship and secured there, the whale towing her great hull through the water as a hot horse walks off with a cart. Again, it is very often observed that if the sperm whale once struck is allowed time to rally, he then acts not so often with blind rage as with willful, deliberate designs of destruction to his pursuers. Nor is it without conveying some eloquent indication of his character that upon being attacked he will frequently open his mouth and retain in it that dread expansion for several consecutive minutes. But I must be content with only one more and a concluding illustration, a remarkable and most significant one, by which you will not fail to see that not only is the most marvelous event in this book corroborated by plain facts of the present day, but that these marvels, like all marvels, are mere repetitions of the ages, so that for the millionth time we say Amen with Solomon. Verily, there is nothing new under the sun. In the 6th Christian century lived Procopius, a Christian magistrate of Constantinople, in the days when Justinian was emperor and Belisarius general. As many know, he wrote the history of his own times, a work every way of uncommon value. By the best authorities, he has always been considered a most trustworthy and unexaggerating historian, except in some one or two particulars, not at all affecting the matter presently to be monitored or mentioned. Now, in this history of his, Procopius mentions that during the term of his prefecture at Constantinople, a great sea monster was captured in the neighboring Propontis, or Sea of Marmora, after having destroyed vessels at intervals in those waters for a period of more than 50 years. A fact thus set down in substantial history cannot easily be gainsaid, nor is there any reason it should be. Of what precise species this sea monster was is not mentioned, but as he destroyed ships, as well as for other reasons, he must have been a whale, and I am strongly inclined to think a sperm whale, and I will tell you why. For a long time, I fancied that the sperm whale had been always unknown in the Mediterranean and the deep waters connecting with it. Even now, I am certain that those seas are not, and perhaps never can be, in the present constitution of things, a place for his habitual gregarious resort. But further investigations have recently proved to me that in modern times there have been isolated instances of the presence of the sperm whale in the Mediterranean. I am told, on good authority, that on the Barbary coast, a Commander Davies of the British Navy found the skeleton of a sperm whale. Now, as a vessel of war readily passes through the Dardanelles, hence a sperm whale could, by the same route, pass out of the Mediterranean into the Propontis. In the Propontis, as far as I can learn, none of that peculiar substance called brit is to be found, the element of the right whale. But I have every reason to believe that the food of the sperm whale, squid or cuttlefish, lurks at the bottom of the sea because large creatures, but by no means the largest of that sort, have been found at its surface. If, then, you properly put these statements together and reason upon them a bit, you will clearly perceive that according to all human reasoning, Procopius's sea monster that for half a century stove the ships of a Roman emperor must, in all probability, have been a sperm whale.
Chapter 46 in Chinese. 揣测 Ahab 虽然给他那目的的热火弄得精疲力竭，但他的整个思想和行为一直指望最后能够捉住 Moby-Dick。虽然他为了要达到那一热望，似乎准备牺牲一切重大的利益，然而他的天性和积习或许太过墨守标悍的捕鲸者成规，因而无法放弃航行的附带工作，或者至少如果不是这样，那就是他心里还摇摇着更多的其他企图。不过即使就他那种边热症来讲，说他对于白鲸的报复心理可能多少会扩大到一切魔香鲸 sperm whale， 说他越杀越多巨兽就越增加机会，因为这样一条一条的杀下去，最后的一条鲸就会是他所要猎杀的可恨的鲸了。像这样的说法也许会太过分，但是如果这样的假定确实是可以非议的，那么还可以另外提出许多值得考虑的事实来。这些事实虽不能说是跟他那带有狂性的主要热望完全一致，然而也绝不是不能左右他的。为了达到目的 ，Ahab 必须使用工具，而在世上所能使用的一切工具中，人却是最会出乱子的。比如说，他知道，尽管在那某些方面来说，他对 Starbuck 有很大的驾驭魅力，然而那种驾驭并不是控制住那整个的精神上的人，正如肉体上的优势并不造成心智上的优越，因为对于纯粹的精神来讲，心智不过是同肉体有关的东西而已。只要 Ahab 的魅力存在于 Starbuck 脑子里， Starbuck 的身体及其受到强制的意志便是 Ahab 的。然而他也知道，尽管如此，这个大副在灵魂深处却是厌恶船长这种烧索鲸鱼的计划的。如果他办得到，他一定会愿意摆脱这计划，甚至破坏这计划。发现白鲸 还得有一大段期间，在这么漫长的期间里，如果不给他一种正常的、小心细致的、相机而行的影响 ，Starbuck 准会随时公开反抗船长的领导。不但如此，这个又机灵又颠倒的Ahab 对 Moby-Dick 的看法绝不会明白地表现出来，而是运用他那最高的判断力和机灵性，预先看出，在目前应该设法消除那层本来蒙在猎鲸之形上的奇特的、不可思议的邪恶性的外衣，应该应付航行的恐怖性。他也看出那些韩员在漫漫长夜中值班的时候，心里所想的一定就是一些私人的事情，而不会想到 Moby-Dick， 因为不论这些野蛮的水手对于他所宣布的收鲸鱼的计划抱以多么热烈的激动的欢呼，这些品类杂的水手总不免反复无常，靠不住。他们生活在变化无常的海洋上，吸到的又是海洋那变幻无定的气息，雇用他们来追求一个既远又空虚的目标。不论这样的追求到最后需要付出多少生命和热情，那么目前最需要做的就是公与私的兼顾，使他们养精蓄锐，以便用于最后一招。Ahab 注意到另外一件事，人在情绪激动的时候，虽然不做种种卑鄙的打算，但这样的时候是悠忽便是的。Ahab 认为，生来娇柔做作的人始终是卑鄙的，就算白鲸已把我们这些野蛮水手的心都挑动起来了，甚至使他们的野性滋长出一个慷慨好义的侠义行为。然而，为了使他们心甘情愿地去追击 Moby-Dick， 还必须满足他们的目的的口腹之需，因为哪怕是古代那些情绪激昂、富于招式的十字军，要是不让他们顺便干些偷盗摸窃的勾当，顺便捞到其他一些以宗教为口实的油水，他们也不见得会心甘情愿跋涉2000里去为他们的圣墓作战。如果硬要他们坚守最后浪漫目标，那么因厌恶而转身便跑的人就会太多了。Ahab 心里想，我绝不能剥夺这些人对于金钱的一切希望。是呀，就是金钱。他们现在或许会瞧不起钱，可是再过几个月，当他们认为没有拿到钱的希望时，那么这种无声无息的钱就会立刻教他们召唤，马上逼死 Ahab 的正是这个钱。就 Ahab 本人来说，也有另外一项预防性的动机。Ahab 可能是由于一时的冲动，或许过早的泄露了 Pequod 的主要秘密的目的。他现在已经完全理会到，他这样的做法是间接的把他的无可辩护的假公济私的状公开出来了。他也估计到，万一水手们大起胆子来，可能不再听他一切的命令，甚至更厉害的抢到他的主挥权。因此，即使是着眼于仅仅暗示到假公济私的污名，以及这种日益增强的潜在印象可能引起的后果， Ahab 也必须急于谋求自保了。不过，这种防卫只能放在他自己的心里、脑里的和手里，再加上随时小心提防、密切注意，估计他的水手们可能受到各种细微的影响。于是，由于以上的一切理由，也许还有其他一些不是在这儿三言两语所能分析得了的理由。Ahab 明白的看到，他必须相当忠实于 Pequod 的航程的本来的名义上的目的，必须遵守一切就例成规， 不仅如此，还需尽量显出他对于从事于本市的活动具有热烈的兴趣。总之，因此就时常听到他的声音在叮咛那3个站在桅顶上的人，劝他们小心瞭望，甚至发现一只海豚也不要忘记报告。这种警惕并非长久没有报酬的。
Chapter 46, surmises. Though consumed with the hot fire of his purpose, Ahab, in all his thoughts and actions, ever had in view the ultimate capture of Moby-Dick. Though he seemed ready to sacrifice all mortal interest to that one passion, nevertheless, it may have been that he was by nature and long habitation far too wedded to the fiery whaleman's ways altogether to abandon the collateral prosecution of the voyage. Or at least, if this were otherwise, there were not wanting other motives much more influential with him. It would be refining too much, perhaps, even considering his monomania, to hint that his vindictiveness towards the white whale might have possibly extended itself in some degree to all sperm whales, and that the more monsters he slew by so much, the more he multiplied the chances that each subsequently encountered whale would prove to be the hated one he hunted. But if such an hypothesis be indeed exceptional, there were still additional considerations which, though not so strictly according with the wildness of his ruling passion, yet were by no means incapable of swaying him. To accomplish his object, Ahab must his tools, and of all tools used in the shadow of the moon, men are most apt to get out of order. He knew, for example, that however magnetic his ascendancy in some respects was over Starbuck, yet that ascendancy did not cover the complete spiritual man any more than mere corporal superiority involves intellectual mastership. For to the purely spiritual, the intellectual but stand in sort of a corporal relation. Starbuck's body and Starbuck's coerced will were Ahab's, so long as Ahab kept his magnet at Starbuck's brain. Still, he knew that for all this, the chief mate, in his soul, abhorred that his captain's quest, and he would joyfully disintegrate himself from it or even frustrate it. It might be that a long interval would elapse ere the white whale was seen. During that long interval, Starbuck would ever be apt to fall into open relapses of rebellion against his captain's leadership, unless some ordinary prudential circumstantial influences were brought to bear upon him. Not only that, but the subtle insanity of Ahab respecting Moby-Dick was now no ways more significantly manifested than in his superlative sense and shrewdness in foreseeing that, for the present, the hunt should in some way be stripped of that strange imaginative impiousness which naturally invested it, that the full terror of the voyage must be kept withdrawn into the obscure background, for few men's courage is proof against protracted meditation unrelieved by action. That when they stood their long night watches, his officers and men must have some nearer things to think of than Moby-Dick. For however eagerly and impetuously the savage crew had hailed the announcement of his quest, yet all sailors of all sorts are more or less capricious and unreliable. They live in the varying outer weather, and they inhale its fickleness, and when retained for any object remote and blank in the pursuit, however promissory of life and passion in the end, it is above all things requisite that temporary interests and employments should intervene and hold them healthily suspended for the final dash. Nor was Ahab unmindful of another thing. In times of strong emotion, mankind disdain all base considerations, but such times are evanescent. The permanent constitutional condition of the manufactured man, thought Ahab, is sordidness. Granting that the white whale fully incites the hearts of this my savage crew, and playing round their savageness even breeds a certain generous knight-errantism in them, still, while for the love of it they give chase to Moby-Dick, they must also have food for their more common daily appetites. For even the high-lifted and the chivalric crusaders of old times were not content to traverse 2,000 miles of land to fight for their holy sepulchre without committing burglaries, picking pockets, and gaining other pious perquisites by the way. Had they been strictly held to their one final and romantic object, that final and romantic object too many would have turned from in disgust. I will not strip these men, thought Ahab, of all hopes of cash, aye, cash. They may scorn cash now, but let some months go by, and no prospective promise of it to them, and then this same quiescent cash, all at once mutinying in them, the same cash would soon cashier Ahab. Nor was there any wanting still another precautionary motive more related to Ahab personally, having impulsively, it is probable, and perhaps somewhat prematurely revealed the prime but private purpose of the Pequod's voyage. Ahab was now entirely conscious that in doing so, he had indirectly laid himself open to the unanswerable charge of usurpation, and with perfect impunity, both moral and legal, his crew, if so disposed, and to that end competent, could refuse all further obedience to him, and even violently wrest from him the command. From even the barely hinted imputation of usurpation and the possible consequences of such a suppressed impression gaining ground, Ahab must, of course, have been most anxious to protect himself. That protection could only consist in his own predominating brain and heart and hand, backed by a heedful, closely calculating attention to every minute atmospheric influence which it was possible for his crew to be subjected to. For all these reasons, then, and others perhaps too analytic to be verbally developed here, Ahab plainly saw that he must still, in good degree, continue true to the natural, nominal purpose of the Pequod's voyage, observe all customary usages, and not only that, but force himself to evince all his well-known passionate interest in the general pursuit of his profession. Be all this as it may, his voice was now often heard hailing the three mastheads and admonishing them to keep a bright lookout and not omit reporting even a porpoise. This vigilance was not without reward.
Chapter 47, The Mat Maker. It was a cloudy, sultry afternoon. The seamen were lazily lounging about the decks or vacantly gazing over into the lead-colored waters. Queequeg and I were mildly employed weaving what is called a sword mat for an additional lashing to our boat. So still and subdued, and yet somehow preluding was all the scene, and such an incantation of reverie lurked in the air that each silent sailor seemed resolved into his own invisible self. I was the attendant or page of Queequeg while busy at the mat. As I kept passing and repassing the filling or woof of marlin between the long yarns of the warp, using my own hand for the shuttle, and as Queequeg, standing sideways, ever and anon slid his heavy oaken sword between the threads, and idly looking off upon the water, carelessly and unthinkingly drove home every yarn. I say so strange a dreaminess did there then reign all over the ship and all over the sea, only broken by the intermitting dull sound of the sword, that it seemed as if this were the loom of time, and I myself were a shuttle, mechanically weaving and weaving away at the fates. There lay the fixed threads of the warp, subject to but one single, ever-returning, unchanging vibration, and that vibration merely enough to admit of the crosswise interblending of other threads with its own. This warp seemed necessity, and here, thought I, with my own hand, I ply my own shuttle and weave my own destiny into these unalterable threads. Meantime, Queequeg's impulsive, indifferent sword, sometimes hitting the wolf slantingly or crookedly or strongly or weakly as the case might be, and by this difference in the concluding blow producing a corresponding contrast in the final aspect of the completed fabric. This savage's sword, thought I, which thus finely shapes and fashions both warp and woof, this easy, indifferent sword must by chance, free will, and necessity, nowise incompatible, all interweavingly working together. The straight warp of necessity, not to be swerved from its ultimate course, its every alternating vibration, indeed, only tending to that. Free will, still free to ply her shuttle between given threads and chance, though restrained in its play within the right lines of necessity, and sideways in its motions, modified by free will, though thus prescribed to by both, chance by turns rules either, and has the last featuring blow at events. Thus we were weaving, and weaving away when I started at a sound so strange, long drawn and musically wild and unearthly, that the ball of free will dropped from my hand, and I stood gazing up at the clouds whence that voice dropped like a wing. High aloft in the cross trees was that mad, gay header Tashtigo. His body was reaching eagerly forward, his hand stretched out like a wand, and at brief, sudden intervals he continued his cries. To be sure, the same sound was that very moment perhaps being heard all over the sea, from hundreds of whalemen's lookouts perched as high in the air. But from few of those lungs could that accustomed old cry have derived such a marvelous cadence as from Tashtigo, the Indians. As he stood hovering over you half suspended in air, so wildly and eagerly peering toward the horizon, you would have thought him some prophet or seer beholding the shadows of fate, and by those wild cries announcing their coming.
There she blows, there she blows. Where away? On a lee beam, about 2 miles off, a school of them. Instantly, all was commotion. The sperm whale blows as a clock ticks with the same undeviating and reliable uniformity, and thereby whalemen distinguish this fish from other tribes of his genus. There go flukes, was now the cry from Tashtego, and the whales disappeared. Quick, steward, cried Ahab. Time! Doughboy hurried below, glanced at the watch, and reported the exact minute to Ahab. The ship was now kept away from the wind, and she went gently rolling before it. Tashtego reporting that the whales had gone down heading to the leeward, we confidently looked to see them again directly in advance of our bows. For that singular craft at times evinced by the sperm whale when, sounding with his head in one direction, he nevertheless, while concealed beneath the surface, mills round and swiftly swims off in the opposite quarter. This deceitfulness of his could not now be in action, for there was no reason to suppose that the fish seen by Tashtigo had in any way alarmed or indeed knew at all of our vicinity. One of the men selected for the shipkeepers, that is, those not appointed to the boats, by this time relieved the Indian at the main masthead. The sailors at the fore and mizzen had come down. The line tubs were fixed in their places. The cranes were thrust out. The mainyard was back, and the 3 boats swung over the sea like 3 samphire baskets over high cliffs. Outside of the bulwarks, their eager crews with one hand clung to the rail, while one foot was expectantly poised on the gunwale. So looked the long line of man-of-war's men about to throw themselves on board an enemy ship. But at this critical instant, a sudden exclamation was heard that took every eye from the whale. With a start, all glared at dark Ahab, who was surrounded by 5 dusky phantoms that seemed fresh formed out of air. The first lowering. The phantoms, for so they seemed, were flitting on the other side of the deck, and with a noiseless celerity were casting loose the tackles and bands of the boat which swung there. This boat had always been deemed one of the spare boats, though technically called the captain's on account of its hanging from the starboard quarter. The figure that now stood by its bows was tall and swart, with one white tooth evilly protruding from its steel-like lips. A rumpled Chinese jacket of black cotton funereally invested him, with wide black trousers of the same dark stuff. But strangely crowning this ebonus was a glistening white-plaited turban, the living hair braided and coiled round and round upon his head. Less swart in aspect, the companions of this figure were of that vivid tiger yellow complexion peculiar to some of the aboriginal natives of the Manilas, a race notorious for certain diabolism of subtlety, and by some honest white mariners supposed to be the paid spies and secret confidential agents on the water of the devil, their lord, whose counting room they suppose to be elsewhere.
While yet the wondering ship's company were gazing upon these strangers, Ahab cried out to the white-turbaned old man at their head. "All ready there, Fedallah?" "Ready," was the half-hissed reply. "Lower away then, d'ye hear?" Shouting across the deck. "Lower away there, I say." Such was the thunder of his voice that, spite of their amazement, the men sprang over the rail. The sheaves whirled round in the blocks. With a wallow, the 3 boats dropped into the sea, while, with a dexterous, offhand daring unknown in any other vocation, the sailors, goat-like, leaped down the rolling ship's side into the tossed boats below. Hardly had they pulled out from under the ship's lee when a 4th keel, coming from the windward side, pulled round under the stern and showed the 5 strangers rowing Ahab, who, standing erect in the stern, loudly hailed Starbuck, Stubb, and Flask to spread themselves widely so as to cover a large expanse of water. But with all their eyes again riveted upon the swart Fedallah and his crew, the inmates of the other boats obeyed not the command. "Captain Ahab," cried Starbuck. "Spread yourselves," cried Ahab. "Give way, all 4 boats. Thou, Flask, pull out more to leeward." "Aye, aye, sir," cheerily cried little King Post, sweeping round his great steering oar. "Lay back," addressing his crew. "There, there, there again. There she blows, right ahead, boys. Lay back. Never heed yonder yellow boys, Archie." "Oh, I don't mind them, sir," said Archie. "I knew it all before now. Didn't I hear them in the hold? And didn't I tell Cabaco here of it? What say ye, Cabaco?" "They are stowaways, Mr. Flask." "Pull, pull, my fine hearts alive. Pull, my children. Pull, my little ones," drawlingly and soothingly sighed Stubb to his crew, some of whom still showed signs of uneasiness. "Why don't you break your backbones, my boys? What is it you stare at? Those chaps in yonder boat? Tut! They are only 5 more hands come to help us. Never mind from where. The more the merrier. Pull then, do pull. Never mind the brimstone. Devils are good enough, are good fellows enough. So, there you are now. That's the stroke for 1,000 pounds. That's the stroke to sweep the stakes. Hurrah for the gold cup of sperm oil, my heroes. 3 cheers, men, all hearts alive. Easy, easy, don't be in a hurry, don't be in a hurry. Why don't you snap your oars, you rascals? Bite something, you dogs. So then, softly, softly. That's it, long and strong. Give way there, give way. The devil fetch ye, you ragamuffin rapscallions. You're all asleep. Stop snoring, you sleepers, and pull. Pull, will ye? Pull, can't ye? Pull, won't ye? Why in the name of gudgeons and ginger cakes don't you pull? Pull and break something. Pull and start your eyes out. Here, whipping out the sharp knife from his girdle. Every mother's son of ye draw his knife and pull with the blade between his teeth. That's it, that's it. Now you do something. That looks like it, my steel bits. Start her, my silver spoons. Start her, marling spikes.
Stubb's exordium to his crew is given here at large because he had rather a peculiar way of talking to them in general, and especially in inculcating the religion of rowing. But you must not suppose from this specimen of his sermonizings that he ever flew into downright passion with his congregation. Not at all. And therein consisted his chief peculiarity. He would say the most terrific things to his crew in a tone so strangely compounded of fun and fury, and the fury seemed so calculated merely as a spice to the fun, that no oarsman could hear such queer invocations without pulling for dear life, and yet pulling for the mere joke of the thing. Besides, he had all the time looked so easy and indolent himself, so loungingly managed his steering oar, and so broadly gaped, open-mouthed at times, that the mere sight of such a yawning commander, by sheer force of contrast, acted like a charm upon the crew. Then again, Stubb was one of those odd sort of humorists whose jollity is sometimes so curiously ambiguous as to put all inferiors on their guard in the matter of obeying them. In obedience to a sign from Ahab, Starbuck was now pulling obliquely across Stubb's bow. And when for a minute or so the two boats were pretty near to each other, Stubb hailed the mate. "Mr. Starbuck, larboard board there, ahoy, a word with ye, sir, if you please." "Hello," returned Starbuck, turning round not a single inch as he spoke, still earnestly but whisperingly urging his crew, his face set like a flint from Stubb's. "What think you of these yellow boys, sir?" "Smuggled on board somehow before the ship sailed. Strong, strong boys," in a whisper to his crew. Then speaking out loud again, "A sad business, Mr. Stubb. Seethe her, my lads. But never mind, Mr. Stubb, all for the best. Let all your crew pull strong, come what will. Spring, my men, spring. There's hogsheads of sperm ahead, Mr. Stubb, and that's what you came for. Pull, my boys. Sperm's the play. This at least is duty and profit hand in hand." Aye, I thought as much," soliloquized Stubb when the boats diverged. "As soon as I clapped eye on them, I thought so. Aye, and that's what he went into the after hold for so often, as Doughboy long suspected. They were hidden down there, the white whale's at the bottom of it. Well, so be it. Can't be helped. All right. Give way, men. It ain't the white whale today. Give way." Now, the advent of these outlandish strangers at such a critical instant as the lowering of the boats from the deck, this had not unreasonably awakened a sort of superstitious amazement in some of the ship's company. But Archie's fancied discovery, having some time previous got abroad among them, though indeed not credited then, this had in some small measure prepared them for the event. It took off the extreme edge of their wonder. And so what with all this and Stubb's confident way of accounting for their appearance, they were for the time freed from superstitious surmisings, though the affair still left abundant room for all manner of wild conjectures as to dark Ahab's precise agency in the matter from the beginning. For me, I silently recalled the mysterious shadows I had seen creeping aboard the Pequod during the dim Nantucket dawn, as well as the enigmatical hintings of the unaccountable Elijah.
Meantime, Ahab, out of hearing of his officers, having sided the furthest to windward, was still ranging ahead of the other boats, a circumstance bespeaking how potent a crew was pulling him. Those tiger-yellow creatures of his seemed all steel and whalebone. Like 5 trip hammers, they rose and fell with regular strokes of strength, which periodically started the boat along the water
like a horizontal burst boiler out of a Mississippi steamer. As for Fadala, who was seen pulling the harpooner oar, he had thrown aside his black jacket and displayed his naked chest with the whole part of his body above the gunwale, clearly cut against the alternating depressions of the watery horizon. While at the other end of the boat, Ahab, with one arm, like a fencer's, thrown half backward into the air as if to counterbalance any tendency to trip, Ahab was seen steadily managing his steering oar, as in 1,000 boat lowerings ere the white whale had torn him. All at once, the outstretched arm gave a peculiar motion and then remained fixed, while the boat's 5 oars were seen simultaneously peaked. Boat and crew sat motionless on the sea. Instantly, the 3 spread boats in the rear paused on their way. The whales had irregularly settled bodily down into the blue, thus giving no distantly discernible token of the movement, though from his closer vicinity Ahab had observed it. "Every man look out along his oar," cried Starbuck. "Thou, Queequeg, stand up." Nimbly springing up on the triangular raised box in the bow, the savage stood erect there, and with intensely eager eyes gazed off towards the spot where the chase had last been descried. Likewise upon the extreme stern of the boat, where it was also triangularly platformed level with the gunwale, Starbuck himself was seen coolly and adroitly balancing himself to the jerking tossings of his chip of a craft, and silently eyeing the vast blue eye of the sea. Not very far distant, Flask's boat was also lying breathlessly still, its commander recklessly standing upon the top of the loggerhead, a stout sort of post rooted in the keel and rising some 2 feet above the level of the stern platform. It is used for catching turns above the whale line. Its top is not more spacious than the palm of a man's hand, and standing upon such a base as that, Flask seemed perched at the masthead of some ship which had sunk to all but her trucks. But Little King Post was small and short, and at the same time Little King Post was full of a large and tall ambition, so that this loggerhead standpoint of his did by no means satisfy King Post. "I can't see 3 seas off. Tip us up an oar there, and let me onto that." Upon this, Daggoo, with either hand upon the gunwale to steady his way, swiftly slid aft, and then erecting himself, volunteered his lofty shoulders for a pedestal. "Good a masthead as any, sir. Will you mount?" "That I will, and thank you very much, my fine fellow. Only I wish you were 50 feet taller."
Whereupon, planting his feet firmly against 2 opposite planks of the boat, the gigantic Negro, stooping a little, presented his flat palm to Flask's foot, and then putting Flask's hand on his hearse-plumed head, and bidding him spring as he himself should toss, with one dexterous fling, landed the little man high and dry on his shoulders. And here was Flask now standing, Daggoo with one arm lifted, furnishing him with a breastband to lean against and steady himself by. At any time, it is a strange sight to the tyro to see with what wondrous habitude of unconscious skill the whaleman will retain an erect posture in his boat, even when pitched about by the most riotously perverse and cross-running seas. Still more strange to see him giddily perched upon the loggerhead itself, under such circumstances. But the sight of little Flask mounted upon gigantic Daggoo was yet more curious, for sustaining himself with a cool, indifferent, easy, unthought of, barbaric majesty, the noble Negro to every roll of the sea harmoniously rolled his fine form. On his broad, black, flaxen-haired Flask seemed a snowflake. The bearer looked nobler than the rider, though truly vivacious, tumultuous, ostentatious little Flask would now and then stamp with impatience. But not one added heave did he thereby give to the Negro's lordly chest. So have I seen passion and vanity stamping the living, magnanimous earth, but the earth did not alter her tides and her seasons for that. Meanwhile, Stubb, the second mate, betrayed no such far-gazing solicitudes. The whales might have made one of their regular soundings, not a temporary dive from mere fright, and if that were the case, Stubb, as his wont in such cases, it seems, was resolved to solace the languishing interval with his pipe. He withdrew it from his hat-band, where he always wore it aslant like a feather. He loaded it and rammed it home the loading with his thumb end, but hardly had he ignited his match across the rough sandpaper of his hand when Tashtego, his harpooner, whose eyes had been setting to windward like two fixed stars, suddenly dropped like light from his erect attitude to his seat, crying out in a quick frenzy of hurry, "Down, down all, and give way! There they are!" To a landsman, no whale, nor any sight of a herring, would have been visible at that moment. Nothing but a troubled bit of greenish-white water and thin, scattered puffs of vapor hovering over it, and suffusingly blowing off to leeward like the confused scud from white rolling billows. The air around suddenly vibrated and tingled, as it were, like the air over intensely heated plates of iron. Beneath this atmospheric waving and curling, and partially beneath a thin layer of water, also the whales were swimming. Seen in advance of all the other indications, the puffs of vapor they spouted seemed their forerunning couriers and detached flying outriders.
All four boats were now in keen pursuit of that one spot of troubled water and air. But it bade fair to outstrip them. It flew on and on as a mass of interblending bubbles borne down a rapid stream from the hills. "Pull, pull, my good boy," said Starbuck, in the lowest possible but intensest concentrated whisper to his men, while the sharp, fixed glance from his eyes darted straight ahead of the bow, almost seemed as if two visible needles in two unerring binnacle compasses. He did not say much to his crew, though, nor did his crew say anything to him. Only the silence of the boat was at intervals startlingly pierced by one of his peculiar whispers, now harsh with command, now soft with entreaty. How different the loud little king post. "Sing out and say something, my hearties. Roar and pull, my thunderbolts. Beach me on their black backs, boys. Only do that for me, and I'll sign over to you my Martha's Vineyard plantation, boys, including wife and children, boys. Lay me on, oh Lord, Lord, but I shall go stark, staring mad. See that white water." And so shouting, he pulled his hat from his head and stamped up and down on it. Then picking it up, flirted it far off upon the sea, and finally fell to rearing and plunging in the boat's stern like a crazed colt from the prairie. "Look at that chap now," philosophically drawled Stubbs, with his unlighted short pipe mechanically retained between his teeth at a short distance. Followed after, "He's got fits, that flask has. Fits? Yes, I'll give him fits. That's the very word. Pitch fits unto him. Merrily, merrily, hearts alive. Pudding for supper, you know. Merry's the word. Pull, babes, pull, sucklings, pull all. But what the devil are you hurrying about? Softly, softly, and steadily, my men. Only pull and keep pulling, nothing more. Crack your backbones and bite your knives in two. That's all. Take it easy. Why don't ye take it easy, I say, and burst all your livers and lungs?" But what it was that inscrutable Ahab said to the tiger-yellow crew of his, these were words best omitted here, for you live under the blessed light of evangelical land. Only the infidel sharks in the audacious seas may give ear to such words, when, with tornado brow and eyes of red murder, the foam-glued lips, Ahab leaped after his prey. Meanwhile, all the boats tore on. The repeated specific allusions of Flask to that whale, as he called the fictitious monster, which he declared to be incessantly tantalizing his boat's bow with its tail. These illusions of his were at times so vivid and lifelike that they would cause some one or two of his men to snatch a fearful look over their shoulder. But this was against all rule, for the oarsmen must put out their eyes and ram a skewer through their necks, usage pronouncing that they must have no organs but ears and no limbs but arms in these critical moments. It was a sight full of quick wonder and awe, the vast swells of the omnipotent sea, the surging hollow roar they made as they rolled along the 8 gunwales like gigantic bowls in boundless bowling green, the brief, suspended agony of the boat as it would tip for an instant on the knife-like edge of the sharper waves that almost seemed threatening to cut it in two, the sudden profound dip into the watery glens and hollows, the king's spurrings and goadings to gain the top of the opposite hill, the headlong, shed-like slide down its other side, all these with the cries of the headsmen and the harpooners and the shuddering gasps of the oarsmen, with the wondrous sight of the ivory Pequod bearing down upon her boats with outstretched sails like a wild hen after her screaming brood. All this was thrilling. Not the raw recruit marching from the bosom of his wife into the fever heat of his first battle, not the dead man's ghost encountering the first unknown phantom in the other world. Neither of these can feel the stranger and stronger emotions that that man does, who for the first time finds himself pulling into the charmed, churned circle of the hunted sperm whale. The dancing white water made by the chase was now becoming more and more visible, owing to the increasing darkness of the dun cloud shadows flung upon the sea. The jets of vapor no longer blended, but tilted everywhere to right and left. The whales seemed separating their wakes. The boats were pulled more apart. Starboard giving chase to 3 whales turning dead to leeward. Our sail was now set, and with the still rising wind, we rushed along. The boats going with such madness through the water that our lee oars could scarcely be worked rapidly enough to escape being torn from the rowlocks. Soon we were running through a suffusing wide veil of mist, neither ship nor boat to be seen. "Give way, men," whispered Starbuck, drawing still further aft the sheets of his sail. "There is time to kill a fish yet before the squall comes. There's white water again. Close to. Spring." Soon after, 2 cries in quick succession on each side of us denoted that the other boats had got fast. But hardly were they overheard when, with a lightning-like hurtling whisper, Starbuck said, "Stand up!" And Queequeg, harpoon in hand, sprang to his feet. Though not one of the oarsmen was then facing the life and death perils so close to them ahead, yet with their eyes on the intense countenance of the mate in the stern of the boat, they knew that the imminent instant had come. They heard, too, an enormous wallowing sound as of 50 elephants stirring in their litter. Meanwhile, the boat was still booming through the mist, the waves curling and hissing around us like the erected crests of enraged serpents.
"That's his hump. There, give it to him," whispered Starbuck. A short, rushing sound leaped out of the boat. It was the darted iron of Queequeg. Then, all in one welded commotion, came an invisible push from astern. While 4 of the boats seemed striking on a ledge, the sail collapsed and exploded. A gush of scalding vapor shot up nearby. Something rolled and tumbled like an earthquake beneath us. The whole crew were half suffocated as they were tossed helter-skelter into the white curdling cream of the squall. Squall, whale, and harpoon had all blended together, and the whale, merely grazed by the iron, escaped. Though completely swamped, the boat was nearly unharmed. Swimming around it, we picked up the floating oars, and lashing them across the gunwale, tumbled back to our places. There we sat up to our knees in the sea, the water covering every rib and plank, so that to our downward gazing eyes the suspended craft seemed a coral boat grown up to us from the bottom of the ocean. The wind increased to a howl, the waves dashed their bucklers together, the whole squall roared, forked, and crackled around us like a white fire upon the prairie, in which unconsumed we were burning immortal in these jaws of death. In vain we hailed the other boats, as well roared to the live coals down the chimney of a flaming furnace as hailed these boats in that storm. Meanwhile, the driving scud, rack, and mist grew darker with the shadows of the night. No sign of the ship could be seen. The rising sea forbade all attempts to bail out the boat. The oars were useless as propellers, performing now the office of life preservers. So, cutting the lashing of the waterproof match keg, after many failures, Starbuck contrived to ignite the lamp in the lantern, then stretching it on a waif pole, handed it to Queequeg as the standard bearer of this forlorn hope. There then he sat, holding up that imbecile Campbell in the heart of that candle, in that heart of that almighty forlornness. There then he sat, the sign and symbol of a man without faith, hopelessly holding up hope in the midst of despair. Wet, drenched through, and shivering cold, despairing of ship or boat, we lifted our eyes as the dawn came on. The mist still spread over the sea. The empty lantern lay crushed in the bottom of the boat. Suddenly, Queequeg started to his feet, hollowing his hand to his ear. We all heard a faint creaking, as of ropes and yards hitherto muffled by the storm. The sound came nearer and nearer. The quick mists were dimly parted by a huge, vague form. Affrighted, we all sprang into the sea as the ship at last loomed into view, bearing right down upon us within a distance of not much more than its length. Floating on the waves, we saw the abandoned boat, as for one instant it tossed and gaped beneath the ship's bows like a chip at the base of a cataract. And then the vast hull rolled over it, and it was seen no more till it came up weltering astern. Again we swam for it, were dashed against it by the seas, and were at last taken up and safely landed on board. Ere the squall came close to, the other boats had cut loose from their fish and returned to the ship in good time. The ship had given us up, but was still cruising, if haply it might light upon some token of our perishing, an oar or a lance pole.